Welcome to the Macon Atlanta podcast. We're talking big questions, bold ideas, and better living with inspiring Atlantans, or in Max's case, ex-Atlantans. Max Mayblum is the founder and CEO of Givers. He started Givers in 2021 after connecting his professional experience in digital health with a personal experience in family caregiving. He's a certified senior advisor, and his work has landed him on lists such as Fast Company's World Changing Ideas, Forbes 30 Under 30, and the holding company's Care Workforce Innovators. Max is an Emory Business School graduate. He lives in New York City, an avid skier, traveler, friend, and a thoughtful guy who is very well read. I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Max Mayblum. Thanks. Max, thanks for joining. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So in our prep for this episode, I asked if spirituality was an on-limits topic and something you would want to discuss. And you said yes, and specifically mentioned the book, The Alchemist. I'm curious if you can talk about what that book has meant to you and how it influences how you see business.
Yeah, well, I read The Alchemist for the first time during COVID, at the beginning of COVID. And it was a time I think everyone was going through their own journeys with sort of what is the meaning of life. We're surrounded by sort of tough times and stepping back from work in a little bit of a capacity. And so I read that book, and I was always a believer in sort of that there's a bigger thing out there. I don't know if you would call it God or whatever it may be, but I always believed in some sort of karma and some sort of path that's made for everyone. And The Alchemist spoke to me in that way. I think there were two really big things that kind of stood out to me. Number one was about getting started and sort of like the responsibility we all have to identify what they call your personal legend in your own life. And then the other piece that I think the book does such a good job of detailing is the perseverance it takes to follow that personal legend. And so now I come back to it routinely in pursuit of what feels like my own personal legend. And it brings me a lot of solace when times are tough. And it gives me a lot of energy to sort of see some quotes that just stick out to me. And every time I read it, something new hits in a different way because it's, a different moment in my life, different moment in my journey. So yeah, spirituality is a big driver of what I do on a daily basis.
Where were you with Givers when you read The Alchemist, and did it change anything about how you approached it since?
So I read The Alchemist maybe a few months before I started Givers, before I had sort of the initial concept. And I had read The Alchemist, and then I read a great book called Ask and It Is Given. And both of those books were really about spirituality and in many ways sort of manifesting and following your own path. And, call it coincidence or whatever it may be, less than 6 months later, I had the initial idea to start Givers and get on this journey. So for me, it was always something that was a long time coming around building a business. I had always been a tinkerer. I love being creative. I was always starting, small companies on the side at work and building websites and doing things entrepreneurially, even as a high schooler. But when I read that book, I think it really just put into perspective that there are no rules or structures in the world that we have to follow in sort of the typical sense. There's so much that we can do to break onto our own path and out of sort of like the norm. And those books gave me a lot of energy and excitement about doing that.
Yeah. What was it? What did it take for you to actually give yourself permission to get over the hump and really actually go for it?
Well, the number one thing was my personal experience with caregiving, which we'll talk about, but I saw it in my own family. And so part of it was actually just a burning platform in my personal life. My family was going through an intense caregiving situation, and it opened my eyes to a really big challenge that we're facing as a country over time as I learned more about it. And so that was one of the pieces that really I needed by way of confidence to get started. The other thing was just doing things, building a website, getting it out in front of people and starting to see that people were responding well to it. I'm a big believer, sort of when a founder comes to me for advice, the number one piece of advice I have for any founder is just to do something. Learning is only done through experience, not really through thought experiments. And so my general sense when it comes to entrepreneurship is to just build something and put it out into the world and see where it takes you. And kind of looping back to the spirituality element and to the Alchemist, is part of it's also being in tune with what's pulling you in what directions and that energy, whether it's internal or external. And so if the market's responding well to something, or maybe there's, a small thing that you had mentioned to someone and that gave that idea some energy, following those paths with an open mind, I think, really allowed me to kind of slowly become, truly a founder and starting the company.
I'm glad you brought it back to spirituality, because if I were listening, I might say, maybe that's spirituality. Maybe that's just having the itch to start a company. Like, where do those overlap? How do you see those playing together? And what is the spiritual nature of the work and how you approach it? I'm curious both what that looks like conceptually, and then if you have specific practices. You mentioned following what's energizing you and being in touch with the spirit. Like, what does that look like for you on a day-to-day, week to week?
Yeah, I mean, so for what spirituality means in this sense, there's a great quote from The Alchemist that I wrote down before this, because I knew that this is something you wanted to hear, was no matter what he does, every person on earth plays a central role in the history of the world, and normally he doesn't know it. And so for me, with entrepreneurship and when I started Givers, I felt this enormous sense of sort of honor and gratitude that I had an opportunity to do something that could help people. I always wanted to build a company that would really change the lives of those who use it. And so spirituality in that sense, I think felt like there's a bigger picture here. And that's really the bottom line of what we're doing, is trying to serve other people through building a great business. And spirituality, of course, is in many senses the realization that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And it gives you that sense of meaning and purpose in everything that you do, including building a company. And then in terms of coming back to it as I build the company, I mentioned the perseverance is a really big component of it. And so when things are difficult, you can think about sort of the bigger picture and lean back on that. And then the other thing that you had asked about is the energy. There's a great sort of like term I like to use, which is intellectually promiscuous. I have no sort of like dogma or intellectual nostalgia around what I used to be doing or what we've tried previously as a company. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And so by way of sort of like the pull of the energy, it's both, yes, spiritual, but also more tangible. Like, what are we just seeing? What are people saying? What are people using? What are people not using? And being really open to saying, you know what, that was what we were working on yesterday. It's not working. We got to move on, and let's kind of follow where the energy is. So I think those things kind of come together, because if you practice that level of spirituality and awareness, it allows you to sort of be in tune with both how you're feeling and your intuition, but also what the customers are saying.
Yeah. I love the concept of intellectual promiscuity. I think about this podcast, and I want to talk about things like Givers and business, and I want to talk about reparations, and I want to talk about dying with dignity. And it's like, I'm going to give myself permission to go all over the place. So I appreciate, that terminology. I think I'm going to take that one. And then it's interesting to hear you talk about the personal legend and every person being able to put their unique dent in the universe and being the center of the history of the world. And, I have thought about that, and I read The Alchemist, and that resonates with me when we think about our own hero's journey that we're on, and the hero's journey being a pretty central element of a lot of different faith traditions. And then I just read the book, The End of Everything by Victor Hansen, and it chronicles 4 civilizations that got wiped off the map over a course of days. So Constantinople, it talks about ancient Thebes, and I have not traditionally been a huge student of history, and this was eye-opening. And so I'm reading about these young men who went to war and then just got wiped out in 2 seconds, and these lives that ended so prematurely and so violently. And I run that against what you just said. And it's like, well, were those people the center of the world in some capacity? And obviously it's a bit recursive. We can't answer that question, but we do sit here in an era and in a moment where we have unprecedented ability to make things happen and make change. And you're in New York right now. I'm in Atlanta. Here we are doing this podcast. This technology is incredible. And so in some ways, it feels like we do have more agency than ever. And we do have tools that the shepherd and the alchemist could only dream of. And so I don't understand everything, obviously, about the past and the future and where we are localized in it. But it does seem like being in tune with the energy around what can we do, what's ours to do, what's giving us energy, what are people responding to, and following that call is how to take a spiritually inclined approach to business. So it very much resonates how you think about that. And I'm curious, is it something that you talk about with the company? Like if, I was talking to a rank and file employee of Givers, would they say, yeah, Max is on his personal legend, or, are they on theirs? And that's something that y'all talk about? Or is this more like your own philosophy that you bring to work?
I think it's probably more of the latter. I would say everyone on the team it wouldn't surprise them if we had this conversation. And some of them, we've had really detailed conversations around spirituality. Others, it's more just in the way that we approach the work. And I think every founder has the obligation really to be in tune with their own intuition and then bring it to the work that they do and the team and how they build it. So, bringing your own personal style into the company is, I think, important and natural. But also we want to support every employee in building their own personal legend. And so one of the things we ask even during the interview process is, what are people's career goals and what are people's life goals? Because A, it helps us understand how we can help people advance towards those goals. And B, it helps us understand, how are they thinking about these things? Are they thinking intentionally? Have they really considered what they want out of their life? Are they driven by some specific mission? Are we aligned in any capacity? When you get to that deeper level of knowledge about someone, I think it becomes a lot easier to work with them. So, on a day-to-day, we don't really talk about spirituality, but it's something that we always kind of consider when it comes to just finding good fits of people who we want to work with. And then also, just along the way, checking in on how we're doing, working towards these goals.
Yeah. And I think the only way that a capitalist system can be a real generator of blessings on the whole and individually is if we help people realize their highest and greatest order of their life and their vision for their life and those personal goals. And so it has to be a growth journey. Companies have to be intentional about crafting that for their people. So I appreciate that you're asking those questions.
Yeah. And building a startup is very hard also. So you got to get people energized. If people don't feel like they are working towards something both individually and collectively, they're not going to stick with the mission. So being able to really figure out what people want and helping them move in that direction, even if a company goes through its ups and downs, it's, on a personal level, if every employee is feeling good and excited about the journey that they're on, then the company gets to keep going with, higher levels of efficiency, higher levels of satisfaction, no matter what sort of struggles it's facing, because challenges are obviously going to come as a growing company.
Yeah, that resonates. Thank you. And you mentioned the idea for Givers happening 6 months after you'd read The Alchemist. What was that idea? What is Givers? Can you give us a little bit of the backstory and how we got here?
Yeah. So I've been in digital health for most of my career. I was at a telehealth company as an early employee, helping bring specialty care to rural and inaccessible areas. And so was really excited about working in healthcare to help patients across the entire country access great care, regardless of where they were. And we were doing it through a really nice consumer-friendly interface and making healthcare just more easy to use and accessible, which, at the time had been a little bit unprecedented. When I moved in with my family during COVID, I saw them, unfortunately, step into a caregiving role. My aunt was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so my parents, when I was down in Florida staying with them, started spending their time driving up to Sandy Springs, Georgia, where she lived, and really making her comfort and her care their number one priority. And I was sitting at home in Florida thinking about how I could help in this situation. And one of the things that I started doing was, taking my knowledge of the digital health ecosystem and sending my parents resources or different tools or research that I think could help them. And it just opened my eyes to how difficult things were for them And it also opened my eyes to how broken the system is for family caregivers, because I had been doing some research on my own. And what I ran into was 404 pages on websites, clunky insurance portals, benefits that were hard to navigate. So I realized there's a really broken system. And I saw it firsthand just how intense and, difficult it is for one family to go through what we were going through. And I quickly learned that it was way more than just my family who was experiencing this type of burden. 53 million Americans are taking care of their loved ones today. And it's really, at least during COVID, it had been or prior to COVID, it had been happening in the shadows, really, and people hadn't spoken about it. COVID, if anything good did come out of it, one of the things is that it really shined a light on caregiving and family caregiving in particular. We had, people moving home from assisted living facilities so they could be safer in their own homes. We had family members who were on Zoom at work and had people in the background. And so all of a sudden, we're all talking about healthcare and our own families. And I think it's really changed the conversation around the role of family members in the care economy. And over time, one of the things also that came out of COVID is that many states started to offer programs to support family caregivers. So it was a confluence of things that had happened in my own personal life and then also across the US that made me realize there's a really big opportunity to help build, I think, what should be the future of, caregiving in our country.
What were some of those things you were looking for that you would hit the 404 pages? Like, what were you trying to help your family do?
So a couple of things. One was I was always looking for, for her, she needed cancer care. So I was always looking for any sort of companies that were just helping, actually coming from the caregiving angle. How could I help my parents coordinate the care a little bit better? So I was finding companies that were sprouting up to do some care coordination. And then on the other side, I was looking around just at resources from a government perspective. And, unfortunately, that was where I ran into the 404 pages in many cases, was just clicking through some of these government websites where, they offered some level of caregiver support, and you go 2 or 3 levels deeper and you've gone back to the same page, or the page itself is broken. And so one of the things that we did at Givers pretty early on was we actually centralized a ton of information about the programs that are available to support family caregivers. And that's been a huge system for caregivers across the country, where we have, million plus caregivers coming to our website every year using this tool for free, where they can answer a few simple questions about their situation and where they are and get a really personalized recommendation for the support that they're looking for. That was truly a solution to the problem that I had experienced firsthand.
So what is the problem that you are solving, and how did you go from trying to solve your own to realizing, oh, there's a business here?
Yeah. So I had called caregiving a burden a few sentences ago. I want to take that back. So we have a saying here at Givers, which is that care itself is not the burden. It's all the other things that surround it. I know with my own family, when my aunt was sick, there was nothing more that we wanted to do than be there beside her, sitting next to her in her bed or helping her around the kitchen. The issue was when we had to step out of the room and make a phone call or find a resource. And so, that was the sort of underlying problem from a caregiver perspective that we wanted to solve, which is all of the burdens and stresses that surround caregiving. So family members can actually spend most of their time focused on the person that they love and being there for them, rather than navigating all the other difficulties that come with caregiving. There's a $7,000+ out of pocket cost associated with caregiving. There's immense emotional stress. There's logistical burdens. And so when I had started Givers, we were looking at mainly financial stress, because we had seen that to be the most intense burden that people were facing across the entire country. And we asked ourselves the question of how can we really help solve this? Originally, we actually were trying to help people tap into tax credits. And over time, more and more caregivers were asking us questions about these programs to actually get paid as a caregiver. And so from, a 30,000 foot healthcare view, the problem we're trying to help solve is, in many cases, sort of the supply shortage that we have of direct care workers, where there's not enough people in these jobs to take care of those who need care. And we have family members on the other side who are willing, able, and ready to step in if they haven't already as the caregiver for these same people. And if we can enlist them into the healthcare system more formally by engaging them with support and training and payment, then we can create, I think, a more equitable and a much better system than the one that we had prior. So that's really the problem that we're trying to solve, is make that market for family caregivers and those who need care, where it used to be so difficult to find a professional to come into the home. And, that could come with a slew of problems, whether that's someone not showing up or someone lacking cultural competence.
Sure. And how does that market actually work? So the family member is getting paid to care for their family member. Who's paying and how much, and what's your role in that?
Yeah. So Givers enrolls, supports, and pays family caregivers through Medicaid programs. So this is a program that's available to those who are on Medicaid and have a family member taking care of them. I think an important foundation of this conversation is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, which was something I had to learn as I was getting started.
Yeah, I think everyone relearns it every time they hear both of them. So
yes.
That's helpful to remind us all. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Medicare is the federally funded health insurance program for adults over 65. And Medicaid is the federally funded health insurance program for lower income individuals across the country. And so Medicaid is this program that has federal funds going towards it, but it's operated at the state level. So every single state has their own rules, has their own systems, and has their own plans to insure people. But the federal government helps back up the wallet of that Medicaid program. So that's how Medicaid is structured. And for those who are on Medicaid, in every single state coming out of COVID, there are programs that allow family members to step in as caregivers. They have to enroll in these programs. They're not very easy necessarily to get into. There's a lot of qualification criteria and a lot of hoops to be jumped through. But once they've been enrolled, they can actually access support and training and payment. And so, the way these programs work is they rely on agencies like Givers to actually provide that support, payment, and training over time. So what we do is we'll help family members through the process of enrollment, jumping over all the hoops and through all the hoops and over any red tape there is to help them get into the program. And then after they're in the program, we'll actually work with them on an ongoing basis where they have access in our app to chat with a coach 24/7, or to access virtual trainings, or to access their payment. And the way the payment mechanism works is that a family member every single day submits notes about what they've been doing. So we can log their work and make sure they're actually providing the care that they say they are. And once we've done that, we bill Medicaid, and Medicaid pays out to the caregiver through the agency. And so that's a little bit of the mechanism of the program.
Got it. And you mentioned 53 million people are caregiving for a loved one. How many of those are on Medicaid?
That's a great question. I don't know actually the statistics off the top of my head, but Medicaid is the largest health insurance program in the country. There's over 80 million people on Medicaid. One of the problems that I think caregivers face is really being in these different brackets of income, and then what that means for caregiving. So when you're on Medicaid, you have access to these amazing programs that allow you to get paid and allow you to get supported. When you're in the top 1 or 2% of the country, sure, you could, self-finance all of caregiving on your own and pay out of pocket. But there's a large majority of people who are somewhere in the middle, and they're the ones who are really struggling, and they're looking for support. And they can access that through tax credits. They can access it through their area agencies on aging, which are amazing local organizations. They can, in other cases, also spend down and qualify for Medicaid so they can get onto these programs. So it's really still a very tricky and difficult structural problem we have in the country around care. Thankfully, I think this program in Medicaid is setting a really strong precedent for how we can empower family caregivers and bring them in to solve this problem. And over time, maybe the country will work to expand these programs beyond Medicaid.
How much can someone make from Medicaid to be a family caregiver?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And, this is a modest living. And so there's always questions about program integrity, fraud, waste, and abuse. And these are really important questions to be asking when it comes to spending federal dollars or any government dollars. And at the same time, it's important to know no one is getting rich off of this program. A caregiver, could make maybe $2,000 a month to take care of their loved ones. So in many cases, they're still falling behind or falling below the poverty line. But what it does is it enables them to think less about how am I going to put food on the table and more about, how am I going to take care of mom. So I think these programs have done a great job at really finding the sweet spot to provide caregivers with the support they need. But also, of course, this isn't a program to make anyone rich.
Sure. And you mentioned something I just want to clarify because I'm not sure what you meant when you said someone who's not in the top 1 or 2%, but they're also not on Medicaid, they can spend down to qualify for Medicaid. What does that entail?
So I'm not a legal expert, so I won't give too much advice on this, but there are methods for people who are sort of on the cusp of Medicaid and income level to, spend down their assets because there's an asset limit and an asset requirement. So there are routes that people do go where they can either transfer money or spend down their assets, and in doing so qualify for Medicaid and be able to get onto these programs.
Got it. Thank you. That makes sense. It strikes me hearing you say that the role and where Givers sits in there is like almost an enabler of a government agency where, if the systems were really designed and easy to use, there wouldn't be a need for Givers because people could just figure out the government dollars available to them. Is that a fair way to think about it or an unfair way to think about it?
I think it's partially a fair way to think about it. Of course, there's so many problems that, the government just won't be able to fix on their own when it comes to just sort of organizational structures or informational structures. And so that's definitely a huge opportunity for us, is to simplify and streamline a lot of that information and allow people to get access to the programs that they need and deserve without having to go through all of the headaches. And then at the same time, the government's never going to be running the agency that is providing that support and that training. One of the things that I think we do really well is we focus on caregivers. We know who we're talking to. We hire and train people based on that. We message on our website based on that. And so when you've got a massive organization that's doing 100 different things, whether it's the government or a giant company, sometimes you can't get the specialty, really niche care that you need to focus on a specific population of people who have a need. So I would say there's always going to be a role for a company like Givers. Of course, if there weren't so much dysfunction in some of the enrollment processes or other challenges that people face with these programs, would it be easier? Absolutely. But I think an agency always is going to have a role to play.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I have a story that this type of support, whether it's direct government dollars on Medicaid, whether it's tax credits, you mentioned the area, supports on aging, are those like well-kept secrets? Do people know that they can access those? And if they are, unknown relative to how they should be, why is that?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, when I was starting Givers, there was an article that I had read that had been part of my inspiration. There was a program in Arizona that had set aside $1 million to reimburse family caregivers who were retrofitting their homes with ramps and grab bars. And of that $1 million, they distributed about 100,000. And the problem, they said, was marketing and getting the word out. People just weren't aware. So as I was starting the company, that was a really big piece of information for me, which is there are programs and supports that are available and there to be used by family members. The problem is just accessibility and distribution of these programs. So I think, part of the problem really is around awareness. I would say it's a large part of the problem where families just don't know that these systems exist. And rightfully so, especially in family caregiving in particular. People aren't training or preparing to be a family caregiver. It's something that
you
happens.
had some other job before your mom got sick, right? Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And by the time you're in the situation, it's so difficult to find the moment to do the research. And so, if there's a local government agency that's not well marketed or doesn't have a brand on the internet, then it's very easy for someone to pass over that information. That's not to knock these organizations. I think I speak with many of them, and the people that work there are extremely well intentioned and they do amazing work. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without them. But part of it is also just the ability to get that last mile and get the word out. And so I think that's a huge opportunity for us to bridge the information gap and connect people to the programs.
Yeah. Is there opposition to programs like this? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah. So I think the important preface to this piece is that these programs have been showing amazing data coming out of them. They save the state money because, generally speaking, someone has to be qualified for a nursing home level of care before they get into this program. So Medicaid is the only federal insurance program that pays for nursing homes. Medicare does not, which is surprising to many people since it's the health insurance program for older adults. But Medicaid does pay for nursing homes. And, it may not come as a surprise. Nursing homes are extremely expensive. So these are programs that allow those participants who would be in nursing homes being paid for by Medicaid to stay in the home for a much lower cost, much more cost effective, with also the same or if not better outcomes. So our program in particular reduces readmissions to hospitals, it reduces falls in the home, and it also keeps people out of nursing homes. It saves the state over $60,000 a year.
Yeah, it costs way more than $2,000 a month to send someone to a nursing home, of course. So if they keep somebody out of there, keep them out of the hospital.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the preface, which is these programs have amazing data. They do save the government money. They have great health outcomes. And by the way, they're in many cases preferred by the people who are using them rather than being in an institutional setting. When it comes to sort of the pushback, we've seen some more pushback over time as these programs have become more popular, because I think it's very easy for these programs to get misconstrued or mismarketed by companies and or consumers who don't know the details about them. So, there in New York was the case where someone had said on TikTok that they're getting paid, thousands of dollars a year to take care of their mom. And now the New York governor is talking about cutting the program. But I think they failed to mention that person may be in a nursing home otherwise. And the program does an amazing job sort of clamping down on fraud, waste, and abuse. So there's always going to be that healthy tension, which I think is really necessary to make sure the government is not ballooning their budgets to pay for these programs. But at the same time, I think it's, if the program integrity stays in place and the focus on those who would be in more costly care settings otherwise stays in place, then I think it's a great program that's never going to really see any sort of backlash.
Yeah. Is the debate practical in terms of, hey, there's this fraud and it's hard to prove and the dollars and cents relative to the care don't add up? Or is it like philosophical and emotional around like, you shouldn't get paid to take care of your mom. Like that's just your job as a son or daughter. Like, is it both? Like, how do you see the debate playing out?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of both. On the practical side, definitely when you're talking about, the governor who's stepping in and saying something, she's looking at the dollars and cents and she's thinking about whether or not it fits into the budget and how the budget has changed over time because of this program. But on the philosophical side, I think that's a really interesting question to be asking. And we don't see so much pushback on that perspective. But to me, the number one reason why I think philosophically we have to let this happen and have to make this happen as a country is that there's no alternative right now. It's impossible to find a direct care worker in many cases, in many counties or states. We're facing a huge shortage, and this is a structural issue. It's not like we have a momentary lapse in the workforce. We've got millions of vacancies in these types of jobs, and we also have the 65 plus population in the middle of doubling. So we're going through some massive structural changes as a country, and this program is one of the best, if not the number one response that I've seen to those structural issues.
Yeah. Philosophically, do you think it should be restricted to folks who are on Medicaid and not affluent? Or should that be something where, if you're making a care decision for your family member, like regardless of where you are on the income spectrum, you should be supported by government dollars? Like, how do you think about it?
I think there's always a level of sort of math to this. I mean, philosophically, I would say that, of course, those who are in sort of the most needy situations, I think should be the first to get these types of benefits. And then, at some point you go up the income spectrum and there starts to be a threshold of some math that you do, which is essentially how much is this person making at work otherwise and how much would they be paying for care? And there's going to be some break-even point or trade-off where it makes more sense for them to be home versus at work. And then in other cases, it'll make sense to say, I'm going to stay at work, make X dollars of income, and then I'll be able to pay for Y dollars of support. And so I think there's probably somewhere in the middle above Medicaid that is appropriate to access these types of programs. But the reality is when it's being offered through the government, Medicaid's the biggest and best vehicle that they have, to expand beyond further into other populations. It's really challenging from a structural perspective.
I appreciate taking a math and a quantitative look at what are the impacts of somebody who's making a certain amount of money going and staying in work versus staying at home and caretaking for someone. And also thinking about the impacts of these roles being compensated. And I was at the McKinsey Global Institute, the think tank side of McKinsey, looking at what were some of the long-term drivers of economic prosperity. And one thing that they talked about specifically for women was the marketization of previously unpaid work. And if that's something there, a family had to scrap to get by, and that person is not earning anything compared to even if it's $24,000 a year, all of a sudden that $24,000 is going back into other service jobs. It's things they can spend on their kids and families. It's more opportunities for that person. They're also likely not going to be in that caregiving role for the rest of their life. But now that they have something that they can put on a resume or speak to, they've earned money from it. They can use some of that money for training and another opportunity. Like, it just creates more potential for offshoot economic activity that I would view as net positive, not to mention the fact that there's something, to go back to our beginning of our conversation, there's something holy and soulful about being able to be with a loved one in that time without it feeling like the bank is going to bleed out. So I see both of those, both the economic and kind of the heart take for why this would be a good thing.
You said better than I could myself, and I would love to see some of that data that was at the Institute, because those studies sound really interesting. And I completely agree. I mean, one of the things that we're still yet to be seen as we do this for a longer period of time is, do some of the caregivers that we work with over time actually stay in the workforce from a caregiving perspective, even after their family member no longer needs care or has passed away? Do they want to step into this role? I think giving people the opportunity to look at, jobs that are available to them, that they love, even if they find it through a family caregiving situation, is always a net positive for society.
Yeah. Thank you. I got rolling and I realized I didn't end that with a question. So I think you handled it well. Tell us about how you're building the company. Like, where are you all in the evolution of this right now, and where are you going?
We're really focused on programs that allow family members to get supported and paid. And we think about expansion on sort of three fronts. One is places, one is programs, and the other is payers. And so from a programs perspective, there's programs that support people who are taking care of elderly parents. There's also programs that support people who are caring for medically complex children who need full-time care. So those are some avenues on the program front that we always are constantly evaluating by way of sort of expansion. On the places front, of course, every single state offers one or more of these types of programs. And so we're always looking at states where we can continue to expand into and get the proper licensure necessary and partnerships necessary in order to serve a new population in a different state. And then from a payer perspective, of course, as I mentioned, these are Medicaid programs, but they have amazing data, they have amazing outcomes. And so any payer, whether it's a Medicare Advantage plan, a PACE provider, an employer who has some sort of economic stake in family caregivers, could potentially benefit from these similar programs where a family member gets enrolled in some support and payment. And so we're also always thinking about the next evolution of this from just a 30,000 foot view of who else might be interested in supporting these types of programs. So, that's a little bit about how we think about growth. Right now, we're really focused on the Georgia market, and we love serving Georgians. Of course, I have a personal connection there, with that being where my aunt had lived. And so, we're in Georgia all the time. You may see us on MARTA, you may see us on TV or Facebook ads. And really having that local approach is really important, because you need to be able to speak to the communities that you're working in. And also you need to be able to build the partnerships necessary to have a really strong ecosystem around you.
Yeah, great question. And that's where I was going. I know you went to Emory Business School, and then obviously have the Sandy Springs connection that you mentioned. What do you see as unique about the Atlanta and the Georgia ecosystem? And then what do those partnerships look like that you're working to build?
So Georgia has one of the better programs in the entire country from a Medicaid perspective that supports family caregivers. It has a really great reimbursement rate. It has a really nice enrollment process. And so for us, we were excited to enter that market because of the market structure and the programs that are available. And also, of course, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, we have people coming across the entire country where they fill out a form on our website and are looking for support. So we actually have a really unique lens into where are there hotspots for family members who are looking for support. Georgia was one of those top states as we were doing an evaluation of where we should go. And so both from a consumer demand perspective and also a structural sort of supply side program perspective, it was a really friendly market for us. So those were the things that we thought about when it came to Georgia. From a partnership perspective, the main thing that we think about is where are our patients? Where are the people who could be impacted by this program? As we've talked about, awareness is really a huge sort of constraint on this program. And so we need to find ways to meet people where they are and teach them about what's available to them. So a couple of things that we're looking for in terms of partnerships that we are always constantly building up are sort of hospital discharge planners, primary care physicians, community health workers, anywhere where people who are on Medicaid may be hanging out, who, you know, if they have a physical disability or they have some sort of chronic condition that's keeping them at home. Those are the places we try to reach people. Of course, we're also reaching people through education online, whether that's, you know, blogs or podcasts or video content. We want to do everything we can to sort of beat the drum around this program so that people can learn what's available to them. And, you know, if it's rightfully theirs, they should know about it and they should have the chance to go and access it. And if it's not something that they're eligible for, we'll direct people to other resources, you know, at zero cost. We'll take the time to send them over to an area agency on aging, or we'll send them to, you know, a different sort of state program that may be available to them, public or private. And if they are eligible, it's great. We're happy to help them enroll and get started with Givers. Got
it. And last question before we kind of shift to the technology and future of care is like, if someone's listening to this in Georgia or otherwise, what can they be doing to support you and to support Givers? And what would you want from the audience here?
Well, the number one thing I would say is really around helping us build awareness. So if you're working in a hospital system or you're working in some sort of healthcare facility and you have, you know, a Medicaid population that you're reaching, make sure they're aware of programs that are available to pay them as pay family caregivers. So if someone shows up to a clinic or a hospital with a loved one and, you know, they're being discharged and their daughter is driving them home, it's, you know, high likelihood that that family member is the one really who's going to take on the support. And family-centered care transitions reduce readmissions. And so if you can have the family member as part of your care transition, you'll reduce the odds that you'll see them back in an institutional setting anytime soon. And so I would say number one thing is if you're working with a Medicaid population, it's about sort of just building awareness. Of course, you know, if I could plug Givers, any family could go to joingivers.com and answer a few questions to find out if they're eligible. Also, that tool is equally as available to a social worker. So a social worker could go on the website, answer the same set of questions on behalf of a patient or on behalf of a family, find out what programs are eligible, print it out, send an email, allow that family to know what's available to them so they can take the next steps to finding the support that they need.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Thank you. Curious the role of AI in this market, both for you all and more broadly. And earlier, you know, you were talking about fraud detection, fraud prevention. I was kind of thinking about, can AI help there? But like, where do you see both today, where is AI helpful? And then if you look forward, where's the puck going in terms of what you're optimistic about?
Yeah. So I think the first thing about AI we should declare is that, you know, everyone says AI is taking all these jobs. It's never going to take a caregiving job, or at least no time soon. You can't replace that person who's in the home. What AI can be great for is removing a lot of burdens that that person faces as a caregiver. So when it comes to finding programs that they're eligible for, we have some really sophisticated matching algorithms that are happening in the background to connect people to programs based on their situation. When it comes to compliance and reporting, it internally makes us way more efficient to be able to gather information and document what's going on. When it comes to providing training or coaching, we're able to leverage some of the newest AI models to provide that support with a human in the loop. So from a training perspective, for example, if we know that someone needs a training on, fall risk, for example, we can go into our training platform and actually use some generative AI to build a script for training and then build that training out. So AI has played a really big role, I would say more so internally than externally facing. It's allowed us to operate as a really lean team, which I think is very critical to moving quickly and nimbly or early on as a startup. And at the same time, it's never going to replace the caregiver who's on the other end of the phone where they're logging into our app and actually providing the care. So, I think it's a great tool for us to leverage. And also at the same time, we need to see it for what it is from our perspective or in our field, which is it's there to support people. It's not there to replace people.
Yeah, totally. What are your thoughts more broadly, especially, serving a Medicaid population, about the future of technology and healthcare and our well-being? And specifically, I'm thinking about the tools and technologies that people with more discretionary income tend to have access to that are around health optimization that a Medicaid population potentially won't or would be the last to get access to. Like, do you see technology as bringing, I would say, the standards of care closer together because more people have access to programs like this? Or are you worried that those gaps might actually increase as technology becomes more quickly available to people with more purchasing power?
I think the answer is probably a little bit of both. On one end, we've always seen that the internet and technology is sort of the great equalizer. Anyone, anywhere with a computer could build a website to, start selling t-shirts, or anyone could go on Google and learn about a specific topic, whether it's health or history. And so I think AI is going to be in many ways an accelerant of that, where people can just access more powerful tools. Of course, on the flip side of that, there's always going to be, unfortunately, sort of people at the highest end of the income spectrum being able to access new technology earlier, or technology that's been gated by price and allows people to, access something different than most others wouldn't. And to me, I think that's where I get concerned. I think, especially with the speed at which AI moves, and really about how revolutionary it is and how impactful it can be on people's lives. To me, I'm a bit nervous just about the haves and have-nots of AI, whether it's someone being able to access new cutting-edge treatments, or someone being able to access a coach or some sort of analytics based on their own health data. I really hope that those programs, as they get developed, are democratized across the entire country, regardless of income, and not just kept for a wealthy few.
Yeah. What are you excited about, and what are you nervous about personally in that field? Like, we were talking about brain-computer interfaces a little bit the first time that we met. Do you want a chip in your brain? Are you scared of that? Are you anti that? Like, how do you think about some of the things that are likely coming down the pike in our lifetime?
Yeah, it's hard to say until we're there. I would say it makes me nervous. I've always been, even when it comes to the technology we have available to us today, I'm always weary of just how much I'm using it and how reliant I am upon it. So if it comes to actually embedding a piece of technology, beyond just what's already sitting in my pocket, I'm going to be even more nervous about that. But at the same time, I think the thing that's so nerve-wracking about that is, again, back to the haves and have-nots. If you've got a portion of people who are walking around with chips in their brain and they're operating at some different frequency, whether it's on a knowledge basis or a communication basis, then what happens to those who have decided not to do that? I think it's similar today to, my friends, many of which are on Instagram or social media. And then, I see them in person. They say, "Oh, you didn't know I went on this trip," or "You didn't see this thing that happened." And, I didn't catch me up. And so there's playing that game of catch up socially that happens if you're not on social media. I'm concerned could be a game of catch up on knowledge or communication in the future. Of course, also as like a big nerd and sort of tech geek, I love the idea of this. It sounds very exciting. I am really optimistic about the future of technology. I have, this just general thought that humans are incredibly strong and resilient. And so no matter what happens to us, we find a way to respond and sort of change to the environmental factors around us. We've done that for generations. Is it scary looking forward at what the next couple generations forward might be experiencing as normal life? It's definitely daunting. But at the same time, generations, I think one of the interesting things that people don't talk too much about history is that generations only span maximum 100 years. And so it's very easy from one generation to a next for people not to realize that life has changed. Very soon, pretty much, the whole workforce will have come of age with technology, with cell phones. And so they're not going to know an age before that. And then, a couple generations from now, everyone will have grown up using AI. And so I think just humanity has a way of responding and changing to just what it's presented with. Being on a generation that straddles that can be scary. And I think every generation goes through it in one form or another.
Yeah. If I have my optimist hat on, my belief is that technology raises the floor for everyone, even as it helps the people who are already at the forefront go further faster. And, my optimistic take on the whole American experiment is that we can gradually give everyone a better standard of living, a better education, an economic opportunity, a place to live in peace. And I see something like Givers participating in that story by more effectively distributing the spoils of a capitalist society. And my hope is that when we figure out the best education models, we get them to everybody. When we figure out technology and food systems that help people be healthier, we give them to everybody. I think there's ample evidence that we would idealistically like to do that, but we don't actually in practice. And so the have and have nots fears around technology really resonate with me. But hopefully enough people will have their eye on that we can figure out safe and effective distribution of those when it kind of happens. I'm curious if there's other things related to aging in place, being with family, later stage life healthcare that you think also need to happen in addition to more government dollars flowing through something like Givers.
Well, there's a couple of things. One is that from a societal perspective, we've had a big shift in generations moving apart, geographically speaking. And that's created a new challenge, I think, for our society, which is, it used to be grandma or mom is a couple blocks away. And now it could be, I moved down south for college and I stayed down south and my parents are up north or whatever it may be. And I think that's a big challenge that we need to figure out is how do we still create a community-based model and leverage people, whether they're family members or otherwise, to have that sort of like behind the scenes support that actually really needs to be more formalized and more engaged in the healthcare system. I think that's probably one of the bigger pieces from a later stage of life perspective. The other one that I'm very, very passionate about is isolation. I see it with my own grandparents right now. It's heart-wrenching to talk to my grandparents and hear how they feel in an isolated capacity, especially as you become more physically constrained by a disability or otherwise. And so that's the other thing that I would say from an aging perspective, we need to get better at as a country. We need to figure out a system for is how do we keep people engaged throughout their life? Of course, I think I'm in the middle of reading the book Outlive, and it's a great book. It's about longevity, and he talks about medicine 2.0 versus medicine 3.0. Peter Attia is the author. And in medicine 2.0, which is sort of the era that we're in, we help people stay healthy until sort of the last decade of their life, and then we're kind of prolonging a really difficult decade. And that's how lifespans have extended. But at the same time, health spans have not really extended. And medicine 3.0 is about actually extending people's health spans so that they're healthy for the entire period of their life, even though that last decade. And so, until we can solve that problem, which is keeping people healthy so that they can be out in the community and engaged and active and doing things, there are so many people, including my own family members, who are feeling isolated based on some condition that they have. And we need to find ways to really keep them engaged virtually or otherwise.
Yeah. Do you have a take on reverse mortgages? So I've got a long iPhone note, as I'd imagine a lot of people do, on businesses that I've never started. And one idea that comes back every now and then is doing something with a reverse mortgage, which a reverse mortgage, if you're listening and you're not familiar, is basically where you would pay somebody now to own their house eventually. And it's a little bit problematic because from a pure dollars and cents economic standpoint, it's kind of predatory. Like basically, if you're aging, I pay you money now to own your house. The way that I make a faster return is if you die sooner. So there's kind of an incentive misalignment there. And so in the iPhone note, it's basically the model I've imagined is you would accrue equity in someone's house by providing them care services that help them age in place. And so they get those services for free. And so instead of them paying you cash, you accrue equity in their house. And so then you're actually more incentivized to have them live longer and live better. But by the time they die, you might own their entire house. There's a whole bunch of problems with it, which is why it lives in an iPhone note. The main one is like time value of money and cash flow on actually making that happen. But the reverse mortgage sense, everyone wants to live in place and age in place, but also we know isolation is a big problem. Can reverse mortgages play a role in that? Curious if you have any take there. And no is a fine answer.
I don't have too much of a take, but I will say that your intuition is right. We've seen it. There is a trend where people are tapping into reverse mortgages as a way to finance their care. And then similarly to what you've said, in many cases, we've heard those stories not end the way people want them to, whether they don't realize that they're eventually giving away the equity in their home and that was the only asset in their family, or some other issue that they've run into with sort of the cash flow of it. So I don't have too much of a take on how people, could access that money. Generally speaking, I would say, tread lightly and be careful, just from what I've seen anecdotally, though.
Got it. Thank you. All right, let's hit a few lightning round questions that we always do. First, your favorite Atlanta meal?
Well, being an Emory grad, I would have to say Falafel King. There's this small falafel hut right in Emory Village. It's been there for, I think, a couple of decades now. It's run by Jane and Nicholas, husband and wife, entrepreneurs who have just done an amazing job. They're sort of a fabric of the Emory community. You get this amazing falafel wrap, and they have this incredible sort of like Chipotle hot sauce that you can put on it. And every time I'm back in Atlanta, it's a must-have.
I've never had Falafel King, but I will definitely check that out.
Highly recommend. I see why you asked this question.
Yeah, we're going to do a Macon Atlanta restaurant guide at some point.
Nice.
What do you think happens to us when we die?
I don't know. The best answer I've heard so far, as I've searched out answers for this question, is Keanu Reeves on a late night talk show answered this question pretty eloquently, which was that those who love us will miss us.
Yeah, I think that's true. That's probably the most certain one of all.
It's the only thing that I think we know, and otherwise it's hard to guess. But having been alive and lost family members, that's definitely certain. And so I think it gives a really nice meaning to life because it's important. It just kind of places value on spending time with people you love.
What is a book or podcast that you read recently? It doesn't have to be recent, but that you've really enjoyed, changed the way you thought about things. And it can be one you've shared so far or a different one.
I'm in the middle of Outlive and I'm loving it. For me, anytime I get a chance to learn something new that can change the way I live my life and try and be healthy, I'm always trying to just kind of optimize myself, and health is obviously one of the bigger frontiers of that. So yeah, highly recommend it so far. It's extremely interesting. It brings a lot of good science to, a layman who doesn't have scientific background, and hopefully it will allow me to make some changes to my lifestyle and the food that I'm eating.
What is like one change that you're considering or have already implemented from Outlive?
Oh, it's mainly my sweet tooth. I have to get it in control, and trying to put some more limits on that. And I think reading a book that tells you exactly what happens to you when you eat too much sugar definitely can kind of put more imagery around what's going on inside of you when you're getting that sugar rush. So that's one of the big changes I'm trying to make.
Got it. I'm on like year 2 of Tim Ferriss's slow carb diet, and that's what curbed my sweet tooth. So if you want to look at that and think about implementing it, but then you still get one cheat day a week, and you can go ham and eat whatever you want. But it's all.
I'll check that one out. Yeah, that's how I found the best success so far by just constraining when I can eat sweets. But I know if it's in front of me, I have very little self-restraint.
Totally. That resonates for sure. What is a habit that you see us having in modern culture that you think doesn't serve us well? And what should we replace that with? And you're not allowed to say looking at your phones too much because everyone says that.
Yeah. I believe in that one, but I won't say that. I actually have one that I think could be a little bit of like a hot take or controversial, but I think in some ways we've gone too global in just like the way that we see the world and like experience our lives. Like I talk to friends who are so alarmed about everything, and I think we're in a really kind of crazy time. But a lot of the times what I try and bring them back to is look around you, like talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, think about your situation that you're in, and things could potentially seem less scary and less daunting. That's not to shy away from problems that we face globally, but I think we're too often focused now on what's happening all over the world or in other states or whatever it may be, and not focused enough on how is my community doing? How can I be a part of it? How can I help improve it? Because if you have a thriving and engaged community that you live in, I'd have to say that's a really enriched life that feels kind of fulfilling. It feels like the life that you'd want to be leading. I think it's like usually the distraction to the outside that makes you start to look away from really like what's in front of you.
Yeah, man, that's so real. Because I feel like we're all trained that we need to be informed global citizens. But at the same time, like we know the primary way you're going to do that is through the news. And we know that if it bleeds, it leads. And the news is predicated on you feeling agitated in some types of way so that you'll keep watching it. And so I just go back and forth between I'll have these really placid weeks sometimes where I'm not interacting with much news. And then I'll realize that I like missed something that most other people knew about. And I can argue both sides of that because I'm like, well, on the one hand, I had no agency over that event. And so it didn't disturb me. And I just continued on trying to do my very darndest and do my best to control what I can control. But on the other hand, like it seems like maybe I should know. So like, I don't know. What does your news consumption look like? How do you balance that?
So I'm admittedly a recovering news junkie because I don't use social media. So for me, like the thing I go on my phone and scroll to refresh most often is the news app. And it's, to me, I've come to understand it's just the dopamine hit you're looking for, sure. Whether it's on Instagram or otherwise, you're looking for something new and fresh to kind of take in from an information perspective. So I've done a lot to try and say, I have a couple rules around this. Number one thing is first, I'd say 60 to 90 minutes of the day, don't look at my phone. I sleep with my phone away from me and I use an alarm clock. I immediately kind of get up and go to the gym. First time I look at my phone is kind of on my way out the gym, maybe on the subway to work. But even then I'm trying to read a book and just sort of like get myself into the day because I think it can very easily derail your mindset for the day when you start to consume so much information. So I would say compartmentalizing the amount of news that I'm listening to or consuming. And then the other piece is also, in some ways, like letting my friends and family be a filter for me. I don't like that I necessarily put that responsibility upon them, but I've like kind of taken that burden off myself, which is if something important happens, I'm going to hear about it no matter what. So it's not my responsibility to constantly be refreshing. And if there's a really interesting topic that I want to learn more about, I'll take the time and do the research. But making sure that I'm doing that in a healthy balance to really like focusing on what's in front of me. I think like what you were saying about sort of like being in your community is And I know that you're doing this is like, it's just about being the change that you want to see in the world. And I think like if everyone does that in some, we've made the world a better place. There's not much to be gained as a society from us all just reading about what's happening elsewhere and yelling about it or tweeting about it or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Starting the day with you in control of what's coming into your brain is huge. I've had seasons where I've been pretty good at that and others where I've let that lapse. And it is a big difference on the kind of nervous system regulation for me over the course of the morning and the day. So thank you for that reminder for sure. And very last question, a hope for Atlanta or for Georgia as you think about the future?
Well, I would, of course, lean on the mission of Givers, which is I really hope that more family members are able to take care of their loved ones without having to worry about how they're going to sustain themselves. And we really have an amazing platform to give people the competence and the confidence to deliver care to the people that they love without worrying about how they're going to make ends meet. So for me, my hope is that this program just continues to expand and continues to serve those who need it and those who deserve it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Max. Good luck to you. Let us know how we can help. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thanks for having me on.
That's our show today. Max, thanks for coming on. As always, I'm really curious what y'all thought about the episode. If you want to text me, if you want to send an email, if you want to comment on here, what stuck out? What questions do you have? What do you wish you want to learn more of? If you want more info about Givers, there's some in the show notes. Macon Atlanta is the best when it's a journey that we all share. So I appreciate you all listening, sharing your time and insights and reflections with me. I welcome your input, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.